Hello, I'm George Brown. Welcome back to the Armchair Traveler. Different setting here today. If you're an international traveler, you know you have to be flexible. You have to make changes. What happened today in our house is that about 30 minutes ago, Comcast, our internet provider, went out, and I called them and they said, "Oh, we'll be back on in about 3 hours." So we made a quick adjustment. My daughter lives about a half mile away, so I'm sitting now in her carport, properly socially distanced, and my grandson, who's very tech savvy, hooked up the internet to theirs, my laptop to their internet. I have a temporary or portable armchair. It's not bad, actually. It's, I think, a beach chair of some kind. But if you've been with us before, you remember that I started out by saying there are 3 requirements for a successful armchair traveler. First, it's to relax. And this shows the flexibility. Usually I'm in my permanent armchair, but I can get relaxed in other places too. And I hope you found places so that you can relax in a quiet way to do armchair traveling. The second requirement is exploring. And really that's what we've done the last couple of sessions, where we looked into the journeys of famous travelers, Lewis and Clark last time, Marco Polo before that. But there's a third requirement, and that is reflect, to reflect. And today, going to shift the style a little bit and focus on that. And the idea of reflection is that as we travel, we build up a body of travel experience. And I suggested first go around that one of the things that I've enjoyed doing informally is putting together a list of what I consider my top travel experiences. I've kind of a running tablet of trying to figure out, well, what are the top 10 travel experiences that I've had in my life? And these are not full journeys. These are days or sometimes just a brief moment, but they're defined by experiences that stay with you year after year, that you can call them up in your memory banks as though they happened yesterday. And the reason for doing reflection is twofold. One, it's enjoyable to remember, to recall, a little bit nostalgia of great travel experiences. But even more than that is to reflect on what makes them great. What are the characteristics of travel that sometimes really stick with you, both to remember that, but also to really serve as a benchmark for moving forward. Well, how can we structure our travel to maybe have more of those kinds of experiences? And so today I want to talk about experience I had in Salisbury, England. So it's a very personal kind of experience that I want to share with you. And as a start, by going back to November of 1999, I was with the Friendship Force at the time. We had our international conference in England. And I said to Jill, well, let's take the kids and go on a vacation to England before the conference. So we went to London with the 2 kids. They were 8 and 14 years old, I think, at the time. So we went to England. We were in London for a few days, and then we were headed down to Devon, about 200 miles away, to spend a few days with friends that lived down in Devon. And I said, well, we got a rental car that we'll drive. We're driving down to Devon, but on the way we can stop at Stonehenge. So we had a nice stop at Stonehenge, saw that great prehistoric monument, had lunch there, and we were getting ready to move on. I said, look, there's a great medieval church just about 10 miles from here. I think we have time to stop in there and still be to Anne's for dinner. And so we went down the road to Salisbury, parked the car, went into this great medieval church. I'm sure many of you have been there. We went in, I put a few coins in the donation box, and we were looking around, and this woman came up, delightful woman came up, and she's clear from her sign badge that she was a volunteer docent. And she said very properly, "Are you here for the full tour?" And I said, "Oh, ma'am, I'm sorry. We have to be in Devon for dinner, so we'll just be able to have a quick look around." And she looked me right in the eye, the smile, I think, but right in the eye and said, "Such a pity." And I tell you, when I heard those words, it was like I was being scolded by my grandmother. Such a pity, because I knew exactly what she was thinking. She was thinking, you know, here's another American who thinks he can see half of England in a day, breezes in and out of great churches like this, treating them like some kind of ancient monument, and then on their way. And I felt bad, but there was nothing I could do that day. But as I left that church, left the cathedral on that day, I made kind of a silent pledge to myself. Well, I'll come back. I'll come back and take the full tour, and I'll do even more. I'll stay for a while. We went on down to Devon. We had a delightful time with our friends. But when I got back home, about 14, 15 months later, there was some downtime at work, and Delta had a cheap airfare to London. So I said to Jill, I'm going to go back to Salisbury for a few days, just on my own. So I bought the ticket, and then I started looking on the internet for a place to stay. And I came across an institute. It's a theological and ecumenical theological institute called Sarum College. And it's right there on the cathedral grounds. And it turns out they have a guest house, moderately priced, great location. So I booked into that. So in about February of 2001, I'm back on the plane to England. I rent my car, pick it up at, then it was Gatwick Airport. Didn't go to London at all, but drove straight over to Salisbury, about a 2-hour drive. Tired when I got there, so I checked into my room, took a nap, and then I was awakened by the church bells ringing. And I went downstairs and asked Linda, nice woman who checked me in. I said, well, what are church bells? And she says, oh, well, that's the call to evensong. Well, I'm a sometimes Presbyterian and don't know much about Anglican traditions. But I said, well, can I go? And is it okay to go the way I'm dressed? It was kind of informal. And she said, oh, that's fine. So I went on over to the church. I went in the side door. I noticed that it was a time of day that the regular tours had ended, so there weren't people milling around. There was no one sitting in the sanctuary, but up in the choir, people had gathered. So I went up there and got my seat. There were maybe 30 of us. It looked like maybe about half the people were regular townspeople that knew what was going on, and the other half were kind of curiosity seekers like myself. But we were there, and I looked out. I could look out into the sanctuary. It would seat a huge, long, beautiful sanctuary that would seat maybe 1,000 people. It was empty. And my first thought was, well, here I'm at this church service, and the church is empty. And then I realized very quickly that was the wrong thought to be having at that time. Because what I realized was that this church was almost 800 years old. And that almost every day, for 800 years, people had gathered to worship there. And now I was there becoming part of that tradition by being there on that day for that evensong. And it kind of hit me that, that when we travel, just ducking in and out of places, somehow we miss something. So I sat back, and the service continued. The procession, the regular procession with the priest and the boy choir. I learned that they have a cathedral school, and that they alternate the evensong services between boys choir and girls choir. The day I was there was the boys choir. Beautiful chants. We had some prayers. There was a short homily, and then we left. And as I left, I felt like I had made some kind of connection with that place. In part for having been there, in part because I knew I was going back across the street to my room and to Sarum College. I wasn't getting back on the bus and heading on to the next stop. And so over the next 4 days, I got to know the church better. I took the regular tour plus the tower tour, and that's a little ambitious. It's about 300 steps. You go all the way up into the spire. I went back to evensong each day. And I explored around, went to the pubs. And by the time I left, I felt almost a sense of belonging, that here was a place that I'd visited 2 or 3 or 4 times over the years. But finally, I come and stayed for a few days and made a connection with the place, with some of the people that I got to know at Sarum College. And in particular, this wonderful building, this cathedral, that when I'd visited before, it just seemed some kind of, ancient monument, now had a different kind of meaning. And the other thing I found, that when I got home, I could feel, well, I had fulfilled that little promise I'd made the day the woman scolded me for not staying for the tour, that I'd gone back, I'd had the tour, I got to know the place, but something else happened. I realized that wasn't going to be enough, that I would have to go back, and I wanted to learn more. And so in good armchair tradition, I started learning about Salisbury. There was a book in those days it wasn't too old, it is now. Ken Follett's book, Pillars of the Earth. Some of you have read this. It's a novel, but it's a great epic novel based on a fictitious cathedral in England called Kingsbridge, but clearly it's based on Salisbury, the history of that cathedral and the people. But as a novel, it really brings to life, I think in a fairly authentic way, what it was like for the cathedral to be built. Why was it built? What was it that motivated people? I've got some notes here. Because, you know, as I read it, I'm thinking, you know, there's so many different motivations and factors that went into it. If you just ask someone or a quick look at the history book, they'll say, well, it was built to the glory of God. And of course, that's part of it, but it's much more than that. You know, there was pride, ambition, jealousy between different factions, jealousy between different towns over who would have the cathedral. There was fear, but also there was reverence and compassion and faith involved. So you have all these human emotions and factors coming into play as very human people in the 13th century were building this magnificent church. And so I read about it, and it led me to want to go back. And so over the years, I've returned to Salisbury probably 6 or 8 times. And one of the things that I get anxious about during this pandemic time is, well, when will I be able to go back? I don't know if I would have gone back this year, but it's been 2 years now, and the sense that I can't go this year is a bit troubling, but I know I will return. And I tell you the story in part because it's one I like to tell, obviously, but also because for me, it's a reflection on travel and the kind of ways that travel can change us. We always say that travel can be a life-changing experience, but we don't often really explain what that means or how that's actually happening. So as you do your armchair traveling, you know, with the exploration, the relaxing, I hope you'll do some reflection too, as you think about the kinds of travel that you've done that's particularly meaningful, and the places that you might want to go back to. Maybe you've returned a couple of times already, but it's on your list to return, you know, to them again, and so that you can get a sense of connection. And even if it's new places, to think about travel, not some of you, a lot of you have traveled with me and know that I'm as much as anybody like to get on the road and keep moving and to see a new place and to see as many places as we can during the allotted time. But it's also important, I think, to understand that stopping for a few days, even if it's 4 or 5 days in one place, and taking the time to get to know that place and those people can be a really added benefit to travel, because it's something that stays with us. And so for sure, I will be returning to Salisbury. And as we look to the travel options and possibilities in post-pandemic world, whatever that will be and whenever that will be, I'll be going back, and I hope maybe some of you will travel with me. And so I'll take just a few minutes to share with you what it might be like to go back to Salisbury. So here's a map. You can see London, and it's just about an hour and a half, 2-hour drive from London down to Salisbury. And one of the things for me when I return is the anticipation, and I'm sure you have this for different places you return to, the anticipation of coming to the place yet again. And for Salisbury, it's down in a valley where two rivers come together. And you come over that last hill before you get to the town, and there it is. The spire is the first thing you see. And there's a sense that really grabs me that it's there, it's still there. You know, when we go to places like that, we think, oh, these are monuments that have been here 800 years. They'll be here another 800 years. But then there's a fire at the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and we realize, no, these places may not be here forever. And so it's a precious time to go and to recognize it still is there, but it's a magnificent setting in the southwestern town. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the writing of Bill Bryson. He's written a lot. He's one of the great travel writers of our day. And in his book, Notes from a Small Island, this is what he says about Salisbury. Salisbury Cathedral is the single most beautiful structure in England, and the close around it, the most beautiful space. Well, that's pretty superlative language for a writer that's been all over the world and has done a tremendous amount of writing about the United Kingdom. But there's several reasons for this. The building itself, construction began in 1220, and it was completed within 50 years. Now that's a long time, but for the construction of a cathedral, it's not a long time because it was built all in one style. And so one of the things that makes it a beautiful structure is the continuity of the architecture. Now the steeple, the spire you see here, was built later. The original cathedral would have had the tower to here, and then maybe 100 years or so later, they put the spire on. But it's a beautiful structure. The other thing that makes it, I think, so memorable is the cathedral grounds that they call the cathedral close. It's about 75 acres with the wall around it. Different buildings inside the wall, including Sarum College. But it was built that way back in medieval times, and fortunately, the city has never encroached upon it. So you'll see here, there's no high-rise office towers or apartments close by. Some of you may be familiar with the paintings of John Constable in the early 19th century. He has a beautiful series of paintings on Salisbury Cathedral, and it looks just the same today as it did for him almost 200 years ago. So it's a great setting. If you come with me, we'll stay at Sarum College, and you can see the picture on the right there is is from my bedroom. That you can actually see the cathedral right out the window there. So it's a wonderful setting. I said that it's inside the wall. The walls, they still close. They have 3 gates, and they lock the gates at night. If you stay at Sarum College, and if you think you may be getting back later than 10 o'clock, they'll give you a key so you can get in. So it's a great place to stay. If you come with me, I think I'll make a requirement that you go to at least one evensong. You don't have to be religious at all, I think, to feel a sense of a spiritual place. This is the boy choir one evening. It could be either the boy choir or the other girls choir. So we'll do that. I'll probably go more than once, but you won't have to go more than once. We'll spend a day or two, at the cathedral. At the left there, top left, you see the workshop. I've actually not been there, so look forward to going there, where they give you a tour showing you how they are constantly restoring the cathedral and keeping it up. I mean, the technical aspects of keeping that heavy tower from falling in are incredible. We'll have some tours and presentations of experts from the Sarum College that can tell us more about the history of the cathedral, but also the life of the cathedral today. You'll have a chance to do the tower tour if you want. Now, this is 300 steps, so you may or may not feel up to that. But if you do, it's a wonderful view at the top. And even more interesting, you get to see the inside of the cathedral and how it was built. But we'll also go outside the city. There's some wonderful prehistoric sites. You'll be familiar in the picture on the left with Stonehenge. Maybe less familiar with the picture on the right, which are the great stones at Avebury. It's about maybe 20 miles farther north. It's a similar kind of configuration, much larger. Not as dramatic, maybe, taken together, but they're just out in the field. So you can wander around with the sheep and get right up to the stones there. The cathedral is not by any means the first church, even though it's 800 years old. You see here a picture of the old Saxon churches with the earlier architecture. The picture on the right is an aerial picture of Sarum, Old Sarum, which was a hilltop fort, which was the site of the town and the fort and the cathedral before it was moved to its present location 800 years ago. And the Magna Carta, you can see the date, that Magna Carta, 1215, that's just 5 years before construction began on the Salisbury Cathedral. But the reason it's here is that the Salisbury Cathedral houses one of just 4 copies of the original Magna Carta. And they celebrated the 800th anniversary of this in 2015, and they have an excellent exhibit where you can really you can see the whole story and the history of the Magna Carta and its importance around the world. There are also, if you're into the Arthurian legends, up at the picture on the left, you may think that's a tribute to the English dartboard, but it's not. It's supposedly the original round table of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. I don't think that's what it is, but in the Great Hall in Winchester, you can see that. And then the lower right, one of my favorites is the ruins of the Glastonbury Abbey. Again, each of these is just about an hour outside of Salisbury. Glastonbury Abbey is where Queen Genevieve is supposed to be buried. There are other great churches. You wouldn't have to go to them, but they're close enough that if you want to, we'll visit them. On the left is the Winchester Cathedral, and on the right is the Wells Cathedral. Again, each about an hour's drive through the English countryside from Salisbury. But it's not just churches. They have gardens, lots of gardens, small ones. I mean, you've been to England, you know about that. The little houses will have great gardens, but then the big houses will have gardens too. And what I find is that England, as an island country, it's nice, and I find it attractive any time of year. Of course, spring and fall, particularly pleasant. Then the countryside, incredible countryside around Salisbury. One of my favorites are the footpaths. If you've been to England, you're familiar with the public footpaths. They're open to the public, even though mostly they go through private property. And there's tremendous amount of opportunity to do short walks or longer ones if you're up to it. And then, of course, if you get thirsty, there's always a pub close by. Now, I'm worried that the number of pubs have been closing in recent years, and I'm afraid after the pandemic, probably even more, but there'll still be plenty left. And in Salisbury, there's some great pubs. There are a couple of very old ones that I like to go to just because they're so old. And then there's other more contemporary ones that have great opportunities too. And when I go into the pub, I like to sit, maybe get a pub lunch, a pint of beer, and just enjoy seeing how that pub is a social gathering place for the people in that community. Now, right now, we can't go to England. These places are closed if we were able to go there. But I find it's interesting. If you go online to the website, this is the website of the Salisbury Cathedral. Just go to salisburycathedral.org.uk. And it's a wonderful way to connect with. It has stuff about the history, but also you can learn what's going on. You see here, we may not be able to open our doors at the present, but our work continues. Click above for more details. You'll find music, you'll find worship services, you'll find what the daily reflections that they're doing now in the time of pandemic. So that's fun, and I think it's an interesting way to keep connected. So that's the Salisbury Cathedral. Sarum College, also it's closed, so it's not giving its regular week study courses, but they have the courses that they're doing them online now. And they also have daily reflections that are short little reflections that you can follow as well. You see the picture here in the front, in the foreground is the cathedral, and then right behind is the building of Sarum College. So there's ways to connect already with Salisbury if you want to. It's one of the ways that I try to stay connected. It's interesting, April 28th, 1220 was when they laid the first cornerstone, and they had fantastic celebrations planned for April 28th, 2020, the 800th celebration. And you can imagine they had to cancel, or at least postpone those for next year. They tell about those on the website. So when we can travel again, whether it's next year or the next, I plan to go, and we'll see if maybe some of you would come along. It's just 8 hours to London, 2 more by bus to Salisbury. We could be there by morning coffee tomorrow. Well, maybe not tomorrow now, but the day after we leave. So someday we'll be getting on that plane, and the next morning be able to have morning coffee in Salisbury. And I hope maybe some of you will consider joining me for that. So that's my Salisbury story. Look forward to hearing some of your stories in the days and weeks ahead in terms of where you've gone and through your reflections. And as you can see, Salisbury is a place that I like to reflect on, both for what it's done for me in terms of the connections I've made, but also because I enjoy continually thinking about going there again and doing more.